Um,
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Dr. Serrano intended to be here and had a family emergency, so he wasn't able to join, but know that he's here in spirit. And then the other thing is, I think we're having the experience that we had together last time, where when you come in, you're not muted. So it may be that folks are joining and it'll make a little noise, and we just know that's going to happen. It's no big deal. But if I keep talking and that noise was you actually asking a question, please tell me to stop. I'm asking a question, and then I will actually stop. So because I would rather hear your voices than mine. So, okay. So what I'm going to invite you to do is think in your minds about what we talked about last time. You may remember we looked at photographs. We talked about the different kinds of history that a photograph can capture, and the different ways that we might make sense of a photograph as a document. We looked at a couple of different photos, and we noticed that in one, it was 3 young women doing the splits on the road, and that made us think about like places that we've been in different communities and different ages. In another case, we were looking at a family at maybe like a cookout, sitting on some lawn chairs, looking directly at the camera. And we started to think about maybe how connected the sitter is to the viewer by way of the face and those eyes. And then we spent the most amount of time with the mine car photographs, which you're going to see again today. But what I really appreciated is I didn't know what to call those things before I met with you. So I learned so much. So thank you very much. And actually, John Jacob, who's the curator of photography at SAM, he's the one putting together the exhibition of photographs from across the US from the 1970s. And I got to see him in person the other day, and I said, "You won't believe what that thing is called." And it was really, really valuable. So I'm passing along my knowledge from you to me to John. So, okay, let me share my screen and we'll get going together. You're going to get a little preview. Ooh, this is interesting. Let's go here. So again, we're within the context of these 3 pieces, right? We've got interdisciplinary thinking, and what I really appreciated is somebody already noted in the chat that they're starting to think through the Renaissance grant about art as perhaps having some more expansive connections to different kinds of content than they had already been thinking of, which is really exciting to me. Today, we're going to be focusing on the National Museum of American History component. And within the context of the project that we're doing, that I'm kind of previewing for you here, that is when we're inviting students to think about what can we learn from oral histories, and then what can we learn from making our own oral histories. And in order to give this an art bent, because thinking about an oral history may feel like a really far piece from your art classroom, I'm going to invite you, if you're in a safe place, to do so, to grab a piece of blank paper or like the back of an envelope or whatever, and then just a pencil or pen. So make sure you've got something nearby that you can sketch with, because we'll be listening to an oral history in just a minute. And while you listen, I'm going to invite you to sketch as kind of a note-taking activity, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So while you're grabbing your blank paper and pen or pencil, I'm just going to keep yada yada-ing for the recording. The big idea that we're doing today is connecting across space and time with oral histories. Though I don't know why this came to my brain just now, but I'll just put it out there in the world and you can be like, "Elizabeth, that is the most wackadoodle thing I ever heard." But one of the things I hear often from AP studio arts teachers is particularly painting and drawing. They'll talk about how their students have challenges with creating a portfolio, because they get in their minds that they just have to do kind of the same thing many different times instead of kind of iterations on an idea, or how do you create a theme. So for whatever reason, this idea of connecting across space and time as just kind of a cognitive frame for that is where my brain went. So anyway, I'll leave that with you. We're going to brainstorm together out loud about the power of stories. Then we'll do the listening and sketching that I previewed. And then we're going to start connecting to your community. And our goals, just as we had last time, are to participate in these critical thinking activities, to collaborate. I don't know why it says there, Kansas, apologies. Make meaning through inquiry and connection. And then I'll just give you the spiel that I gave you last time about how to bring us to your classroom in person. And I've already gotten some notes about that. So if I haven't written back to you, it's not because I don't love you. It's just, it's performance reviews time at the Smithsonian, and I'm just a new supervisor. So give me a little minute and I'll be back with you. Okay, so then I've yada yada enough. Here is where, if you can type. If you feel like speaking aloud, I'd love to hear your voice. And if you're driving, just keep your hands on the wheel. I would love to know from you, what ways do you think art contributes to history? In what ways do you think art contributes to history? And you can share out loud, or you can drop an idea in the chat. Ooh, I see things coming in. I love to see things coming in. Okay. In what ways does art contribute to history? Okay. It makes it much more interesting. Kimberly Mills, yes. I had no love for history until I started working in an art museum. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much more behind these images than I ever thought of before. Paints a picture of what life was like. It reflects the culture, documenting moments in time. I love this. Portrays important ideas. So what an intriguing concept that you can show an idea visually. It highlights, marks, and identifies events and time periods. Beautiful. It's a documentation. It tells the stories of the past. It's almost like you know the theme of this session. I love it. A look at what it looks like. It documents, it shows fashion. Katie Parker, yes, indeed. And it's really interesting to invite students to think about fashion as not just a way of expressing their identity, but as actually a product of their historical time period, because it feels like we're all doing something that's like so brand new. And then we start to realize, like, not only is our fashion of the day inflected by the past, but also is a reaction to the present, which is very interesting. Marcia Hubbs brings the truth. Art can pass on truth or falsehood, depending on the artist or who commissioned it. And that's a really interesting tie to historical thinking. When we think about documents like letters and diaries, but even, just like white papers or any number of different documents, we want to think about who wrote it and what does it tell us about kind of the filter through which they may have written that document. Same for art. I love this. Showing perspective depending on the artist. And then Jordan Weiler, I think, to show how things have changed over the years. And this, if you are a history teacher and you have an AP US history program at your school, I'm going to invite you to consider that for AP US history teachers, the question that they say is hardest for students on that test is the continuity and change over time question. And I think that's really interesting because students are pretty good at noting what has changed, and they find it more challenging to consider what has stayed the same and why. And that's a really interesting thing that art can offer us, because it's super easy to take two artworks and look at them and challenge students to notice, like, what's different. But then that question, what's the same, can sometimes really challenge us to think in more conceptual ways or overarching ways. And it's something that I think is pretty beautifully unique in art. Connecting visually, tone and feeling, it shapes the way we reflect on history. What a beautiful statement, and I agree. Okay, so we can see that art has a place in history, and part of the reason I'm building this argument up front is because we're not going to spend a lot of time looking at art today with oral histories, but I want you to consider that while you are practicing within the studio art sphere, the product of your studio or this product of your students' hands has its place in history. So there's my argument made very explicit. We're going to move ahead. And we are going to look at a poem, which is by the author that you see on the left side. She's a Laguna Pueblo writer named Leslie Marmon Silko. And she says in the preamble to this book she wrote, you don't have anything if you don't have the stories. So they try and destroy the stories, let the stories be confused or forgotten. They would like that. They would be happy because we would be defenseless then. He rubbed his belly. I keep them here, he said. Here, put your hand on it. See, it's moving. There is life here for the people. So I'm going to read that aloud again. And for those of you who have a piece of paper or a pencil nearby, or feel comfortable grabbing one now because I didn't cue you in time, go ahead and do that. And just as I read aloud, would you please sketch any image that's coming to you as provoked by these words? So again, this is the preamble, so the opening portion of a book called Ceremony by a Laguna Pueblo author named Leslie Marmon Silko. And she starts her book, "You don't have anything if you don't have the stories." So they try and destroy the stories. Let the stories be confused or forgotten. They would like that. They would be happy because we would be defenseless then. He rubbed his belly. "I keep them here," he said. "Here, put your hand on it. See, it's moving. There is life here for the people." I'm going to give you a full minute of my silence, and I'm going to invite you to just keep your hand moving. Keep capturing or refining the image that came to you as a result of these words. I'm going to move my spot.
Hi.
Hi. You're going to come to my basement. It's going to be so fun. Hopefully I didn't hook my cat out. He'll be really mad. No, he's down here. Okay. I didn't give you my silence at all. I'm so sorry. Ooh-ba-doo. Okay. If you are willing, I'd be very curious to know in the chat, or alternatively, if you'd be willing to turn on your camera and hold your drawing up, I would love to know what was provoked by these words. What images came to you? What did you draw about? Some people are still drawing, which I love. What can Whoa, the book is X'd out and there's people writing their stories. I love it. Robin, will you show me one more time? I'm so sorry. I just got to you. Oh, it's so expansive. Love that. It's almost like a beautiful explosion. And it's reaching in and out. That's awesome. Photo essays. I never considered it as art. Oh, Angie, yes, it's art. I'm saying it's art anyway. Beautiful personal narrative as an artwork. Any other images that came to you as a result of listening? Andrea, thank you so much for holding it up. Hold on. Oh, it's trying. Your camera's like working so hard. Your face is beautiful and crystal clear, but wait, do you mind unmuting and just describing what you made, Andrea?
Sorry about that. I was trying to fix it, but I'd actually drew a little man because it had referred to he, and he was rubbing his belly with holding a book. And then I drew a heart floating above a road that goes off into the mountains because of there's a lifelong life journey alluding to here.
I love that. And Sarah Cox is holding up an image of a big, beautiful belly with this shining heart in the middle. That's amazing. I love that. So we see this really strong connection between kind of a metaphorical heart and then the physical body and the life as a story, this long line going ahead. And I love that. Thank you so much. Okay, so in this book, Leslie Marmon Silko is weaving together myth history, and personal recollection. So Angie, you're already on it. This idea of like a personal narrative is just baked in here. And one of the critics who read this book says it's about a man who's displaced in World War II, taken away from his home and away from the stories, and then he has to come home and reacquaint himself with the landscape of who he is, his stories, and what he knows from this landscape. So thinking about stories as a landscape, sort of a new metaphor. So then Orlando, who would have been presenting this to you, wanted to share with you a way that his family connects with stories. So I'm going to invite you to look at the image of his own house that he's provided us with. And think about the idea of creating a diorama, or creating an ofrenda, or creating a three-dimensional collection about your family. And I wonder what connections you can make between what you see on the right side of the slide and what you see on the left side of the slide. What connections can you make between the poem that we just read and this family's ofrenda? If you're not familiar with the practice of ofrenda, let me know and I can give you more information.
Why does it always say recording in progress?
The photos help. Tell me more, Andrea. I want to know more.
It's almost like the pictures tell their family story. So they don't really need books or stories to be confused or forgotten because they're inside.
I love what you just said. That's so beautiful. So the stories are not confused or forgotten because they're kind of taken inside. And I really love that. Jennifer's making a connection to the idea of lives lived or in progress, which connects really beautifully with the road that you've brought up as a visual metaphor. I really like that. Robin is saying maybe this is the belly. It's almost like we're looking from inside to toward outside the belly. I love that. Oh, Christy, a great connection to Joseph Cornell's boxes, this artist who spent a lifetime gathering these little materials and arranging them really, really perfectly. He lived in the same house that he lived in as a child, and he was kind of in this dream space and created a dream space in his boxes. That's really beautiful. One of the things that Orlando says about his family's practice of creating an ofrenda is that every time they put up these family pictures, they also tell stories about those people. So it's like when you open a photo album and you remember your Auntie Jane's like wedding and how you got to sit under the piano and you stole tea cakes or whatever, you know, like whatever that picture provokes in you, it gives you an opportunity to tell somebody about it. And what he says is that the way of picking these pictures out of the family members who have already passed and putting them up is a way of keeping them with us, but also a way to root his family in their stories. So it's like a way of remembering, which I think is really beautiful. I love this idea of writing can be difficult for some folks, so providing another way to convey the message is really important. So like this, in this case, we have artwork providing a visual reinforcement of a poem, but also perhaps the poem could provoke an artistic creation itself. So then, ofrendas is the practice of kind of bridging past and present through your family. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of background for this next bit because it's kind of important. Where Orlando works is like this little nook inside of the National Museum of American History, and it's called the Center for Restorative Justice. And one of the main components of it is to engage with communities to center their knowledge and stories. So instead of the big bad the National Museum of American History coming to them and telling them, this is your history, they go to them and say, tell me about your history. I'd like to know more. And so they have worked together with communities that you see here in Los Angeles and San Diego, Mexico City, Nebraska, Chicago, DC, Raleigh, North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, and who's hiding behind there? Asheville, North Carolina. And this is part of an initiative called the Undocumented Organizing Collecting Initiative. And it's working with undocumented organizers and activists to gather their histories, to hear them tell their own stories. And it's been really interesting for Orlando and the folks that he works with, because they've had to think really carefully about asking for permission to take oral histories. And so here's a question for you. If somebody came to you and asked you to tell them your story, what rights would you like? Not a rhetorical question. What rights would you like? Or what questions would you want answered? Sure. Oh, Jennifer, awesome. So Sarah's asking, can I say the question again? In the context of oral histories, if I came to you, Sarah, and I was like, hey, I'd really like you to tell me your life story. What would you like to know? Or alternatively, what rights would you like to have? Jennifer wants to know, what are you going to do with this information? The right to tell it as I experienced it. Beautiful, Catherine. What is your interest in this, right? Tell my story and not have anyone influence my story after I told them. Beautiful. Having the right to tell my truths, right? So we want to be understood as having had an experience that was ours, that was not for somebody else to tell, or alternatively for someone to twist around after it's left our mouth. I think that's totally fair, right? So then for Orlando and the people who are doing this work in the states that you see here and in Mexico City, it's an opportunity to be really careful about asking for permission before taking words from people. And it's very interesting when we start to consider this in the context of like street photography and other things, right? Like when we send kids out in the street, we're like, just take pictures. It's like, it's in public, like go take a picture of people you think are doing interesting things. It raises this question of like, well, what kind of conversations could we be having about consent, about giving permission and that sort of thing? Rachel is adding a really interesting layer, retaining the rights to the story in case it gets published. I love that. Marlena says, what makes my story worth telling for you? I love that too. Wanting to make sure that our words are not taken out of context is, and Wiley, yes. You don't want somebody to take your story and then make a bunch of money off of it. It doesn't feel fair. It feels very transactive. It's like your story has become some kind of piece of property that's not yours. So then it's within this kind of mindset that there was a series of oral histories done actually in my city, in Washington, D.C. And it's part of a digital exhibit that talks about how Washingtonians have shaped and reshaped their neighborhoods in extraordinary ways. So what I'm going to do is invite you to do what you did before, where instead of jotting down words or phrases in response to something you hear, I'm going to invite you to sketch and draw. So the oral history that we're about to hear is from a woman whose name is Isabel de la Rosa, and she is a longtime resident of Washington, D.C., who was not born there. And we're going to hear her, but we are not going to hear the questions she was asked by her interviewer. So this is going to become a little bit of a puzzle, but also just an opportunity to listen really deeply. So then I'm going to play this. And while you listen to Isabel tell her story, sketch what you hear. It might be that you sketch themes. It might be that you hear an interesting sound and you actually start to sketch that sound, or you try to imagine the scene that is around them, because we can't see anything. We're just going to hear voices. So any questions before I get this recording going? Okay, so this was a recording made in February 28th, 2020. And here we go.
My mother was like a housewife, I would say. Yeah.
Oops, sorry guys.
My mother was like a housewife, I would say. Yeah. And so she used to, I remember she used to do different types of whatever she could. I know one time she had, she will wash clothes, you know, iron men's shirts, you know, because back then it was nice and pressed. And so she did that at one time. And I remember all the things like going to Guatemala, buy some vegetables, come back over here and sell them in the market, you know, and things like that. Oh, it was cold because it was in like I said, Halloween night. So it was really cold at night. Yes, and it was dark because the plane came, you know, like late at night. So I didn't see too much. But the next day, I guess, well, my first impression was like how buildings were, you know, tall and the people, and especially colored people, you know, because in El Salvador we never saw one. You know, we never see one. So to me, that was like, you know, different. I would say, yeah, to see and nice, yes. We liked it, you know. We used to walk. There was a in the corner of Colombia and 18. I remember used to be a they used to call bodegas, you know, because I guess the owner was Cuban. so like a small store. We used to go in and shop there. I remember, and then in the opposite corner, I think that was a drugstore. I remember they have all kinds of things, you know, like a grocery store type thing. And yeah, I remember all that. But nice, you know, there was a mix, like a several, you know, of cultures and stuff. And then there was a pharmacist right across where we lived. I think the owners, I'm not sure, the owner was from India, you know, the Hindu people. And so there was a mix of cultures there.
And you see,
it was great, you know. Of course, we were part of it. I'm not in the picture, but well, I think I'm in one of them. That we did one of the dances, like from El Salvador, like native dances. We had the dresses and everything.
oh wow,
And then that was in Colorama Park.
okay,
Yeah, so after the people walking, you know, they went
And
to
then-
the Colorama Park. And then they had where we have all the shows there. I remember my friend, this girl Sonia Taylor, that she knew to dance a lot of the Cuban dancers, and we have a Cuban friend also. They did the mambos and everything, really
wow.
nice, both of them. Yeah, so it was like different type of stuff. It was nice. There was food there, you know.
And how did you
The festival.
Okay. So, without knowing anything about Isabel, without knowing anything about her story, except what we hear here, I'm curious, what images did you capture? What did you grab from that soundscape? Either out loud or sharing your work with the camera, just as you did before with the poem. Andrea, I see we're having the same issue. I'm so sorry. Oh, look at the back of the envelope, really, with Robin. Oh, Robin, I love you've got like the laundry on the line. You've got the tall buildings. I love that. There you are, Andrea. I see your face. Heather, you've made it almost just like a quilt, like hanging on a line with different scenes, but love in each corner. Will you tell me more about it?
Yeah, that's exactly what came to my mind, because the first thing mentioned was the laundry. And so I was picturing that being done and like being outside and putting the laundry on the line. And then as more details were coming in the story, it just made me think of a patchwork quilt.
Yes.
And that the different, and I just kind of ran out of time to start filling the rest of the fact, but that, you know, she talked about dancing and then the vegetables and then being in the park and in the city. And so, yeah, that's what I was going for. So I'm glad it translated.
It came right
bachelor.
through. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I'm just paging through to look at other video feeds. If you're holding up your thing and I haven't spoken to you yet, apologies, but be persistent. There we go. Ooh, Andrea. Oh my gosh, you've got like a whole cafe scene and an airplane and like, okay, tell me more. Tell me what part is like that you wish you had a little more time, you would have added a little more.
So I tried to get with the little tables with the little coffee cups on it with the atmosphere of like a busy like coffee shop, and they were sitting there talking and you had people in the background moving around.
Yep.
And then I referred to the Cuba, the statue, the big monument with the mile marker 1 from the ocean from Key West and being in the busy part of it. And then I had the moon out because she said it was very dark and late at night and the plane had got in late. And then I wrote the date up above in the clouds. So, but I would have definitely tried to put some people talking. I didn't have a chance to draw the couple talking.
Beautiful. So, right, it's a really complex soundscape, right? There's cafe noise, there's clinking, there's music in the background, there's all kinds of stuff happening. Angie, show me what you've got. I can't wait to see it. Oh my gosh, I love it. It's like,
Okay.
I see buildings and lots of them.
So like when she was talking about going to going and buying the vegetables and bringing them back to market. So I was just imagining that she was kind of pointing out where maybe buildings had been and like the little tables there were there at the open air markets. If you've been down to any of those like Central American countries, there's a lot of open air markets. And so that's what I was thinking of.
I love it. Okay, so this is gorgeous. And I see Shayna, apologies, I'm butchering things, but has added into the chat. The laundry is really coming through. I love that you included like a washing contraption that's not like a washing machine. It's like got the wringer and everything. Noticing this little storefront. So right, there's all these little vignettes that our speaker is offering us, right, through her recollections. What I think is really fascinating is where we start out with her is actually in her early life in El Salvador. She's remembering kind of before that first awkward silence, she's remembering about her mother pressing clothes and the life they had in El Salvador. Then there's like that long awkward pause that I didn't prepare anybody for. And then she talks about Halloween, I think, and it was cold and dark and she comes on the airplane. What do you think that question was? Because El Salvador is not known for being cold or dark or having Halloween. So what's happening? What's the question that prompts her to switch to that part of her story? Do you think? This is hypothesizing.
I think it's when she arrived in the States.
Tell me more. Why is that?
Well, as we know, Halloween's around the corner. It's celebrated heavily in the United States, and I think that is maybe when she arrived or shortly after. Beautiful. And yeah, that's my thinking.
Love it. So talk to me, anybody in the room right now. What is it like when you arrive in a new place at night? What is the experience of arriving in a new place at night? Because like she says, she's coming off the airplane and it's very dark. And then the first thing she notices, like when she can see, is these tall buildings. But what's that? What is it? What is your like emotional and physical experience of arriving in a new place at night?
It's magical.
Debbie Manuel, you are an adventuress at heart. I love it. Robin is more where I am, which is like no sense of direction in the unknown. Summer Walters saying the unknown too. Kind of makes you wonder, kind of makes you anxious. So this is interesting, right? Like each of us carry a certain connotation in our hearts and our minds about this kind of adventure. Okay, so then she starts to talk about her city. And I want to show you, oops, I went too far. this is her neighborhood. It's Adams Morgan, which is a neighborhood that has a long kind of history in and of itself. But this map here is where she grew up. And so when she's talking about 13th and Columbia, we could find it here. But I'm just curious, like, what's your first impression of this little section? This is actually quite a small part of the DC area, but what's your first gut impression of this spot? Busy. Same for me. Right? Anybody else getting busy from this? It's like nothing like the town she came from. Diverse. I love this. Okay, so my friends, I have basically grown up in this area. I cannot drive around in DC because all these streets, it is not a grid system. It is an old city. Somebody is giving me that it is not a grid. Rebecca Isaacs is like, it is absolutely not. You can get lost anywhere. And like things loop around and there are streets, they only go in one direction and it's just wackadoodle, right? So you got to imagine that this little girl has gone from a place where she used to go to Guatemala and get vegetables and bring them back. And then she, you know, her mom's doing laundry and then they get on an airplane and they come here and it's so different. But remember how she talked about where she lived, where she talked about her neighbors. What was the emotional flavor or the kind of mood of the way she talked about the bodega, the way that she talked about the pharmacy, the way that she talked about these places? What was her impression of her community when she got settled? Fondness. Beautiful. I love, what a beautiful choice of words. Fondness. So Isabel is actually the young woman who's smiling out at us in the ruffled shirt in the image just above there. And we can imagine this girl like doing her life, going to the bodega, getting like what she needs for her family, right? She's interacting with people from all over the world. If we were going to draw a metaphor for the way that she takes us through her life up to that point, what would you draw? What image comes to mind when you think about the way that she talks about her neighborhood once she kind of gets there? You're welcome to unmute if it's too hard to type it. Knitted together. Oh, interesting, Marlena. We had from earlier an idea about a quilt. For you, Marlena, why knitted instead of a quilt? I'd love to know more. Patricia's adding different cultures and interaction. I love it. Connected her home with her new home, right? This is not a broken thread. It's a line that carries through. That's so beautiful. Robin says she's reminiscing about what doesn't exist anymore. So she's telling you how it changed. This is gorgeous. So, right, her neighborhood went through changes. Her life went through changes. She talks about the friends that she's meeting where they know how to do the mambo and they're doing the mambo at this like community gathering, and people who don't know how to dance are watching them. And this, just as you say, Debbie, very nostalgic, right? So then we have the idea of past, oh, I love it, past experiences reflecting on today. This is the power to me of oral histories, because oral histories, just as you guys said, right? You want to be able to tell your own story your own way. And when we ask evocative questions, when we challenge ourselves to go beyond, do you like strawberry ice cream or chocolate ice cream, or what's your favorite sports team, which can be a very deep question, and I know that can bring up a lot of emotions for people, but when we challenge ourselves to cultivate that question asking, we get those really rich answers like Isabel gave to her interviewer, right? So then let's go back to our old friend, that photograph that we looked at before together, these guys on the mine car. And I'm just going to ask you to like recheck this. I know you looked at it 2 weeks ago. You're art teachers, you know how to see things and remember details, and that's great. You also have very busy lives and lots to do. So just like zoom back in on the photograph for a little bit. You may remember we mentioned a little bit about how that light drew our attention. We told stories about who was waiting for these folks at home. We told stories about what it might be like to go into or come out of this darkness. We made some connections to family members that we know and love, or tell their stories, just like Orlando tells the stories of his family who have gone before. Maybe you're telling the story of somebody that you love who's gone before. And so this photograph, if we took it as an invitation to spark some questions, open-ended questions that would evoke that kind of rich response, what questions would you ask of the people in this image? If you wanted to be an oral historian who drew out really rich answers from people, what questions would you ask? Would you go back to this time if you could? Robin, I love that. Great question. What more to ask? What are your names and where do you live? Okay. What would you want to share with others? What were the smells that describe this time? Yeah, I can imagine like you've just given me a whole story in my head, Marlena, because I have this idea of like, what smells did they smell in the mine? And then what smells did they bring back with them on their bodies and on their clothes? Because their family is experiencing that smell too. That's really interesting. Do you see a lunchbox like this anymore? Andrea, I'm really interested in that because I was thinking about a question like, who packed your lunch? And did they pack something you like, as sort of like an opener question, and then going more deep into like, where do you eat your lunch? Can you even sit up straight? Like, what's it like to eat lunch in the dark? You know, that kind of thing. What is the most challenging part of the job? That's beautiful. What does the coal dust taste like? Are you concerned for your safety? Were you scared? Love it. What does it feel like coming out at the end of the day? My gosh. So these questions would get us really like into an interesting territory. We might need to build up a little trust first. Like, I'm not going to just walk up to somebody I've never met without their permission and be like, talk to me about your safety concerns. Like that would probably get a little bit of some flags going up, but I really appreciate that. If we were inviting people into conversation, we could kind of stack and order these questions in thoughtful ways. And just to flag it, one of the things that I think is really interesting and to invite students to think about questions and the practice of asking questions is like, which ones do you start with and why those do you start with? And then which ones do you feel like you have to save up toward the end where you've kind of like built up a little bit of a rapport, just to like flex those social skills, because all of us came out of COVID just a little bit atrophied in certain social ways. Andrea is noting, when you come outside to the light, how does that feel? I love that question. How long was your shift today? Beautiful. So here's the thing. This is where the chat box is actually like an incredible asset. I'm going to ask you to just scroll back to the top of where we started asking questions and just reread them and honor those questions that your colleagues asked with your attention. And as you go, think about, why would the answers to these questions matter to you? Why would knowing this information matter to you? And this is almost directly in response to, I'm scrolling back and using the chat box, but there was this like, why do you want to know my life story? At the very beginning, we were talking about like, what would you want to know from the oral historian? Like, why is my story valuable to you? So like, let's ask ourselves, why would the answers to these questions be valuable to you? They tell us about the person, Catherine said. What more do they tell us? How does it feel coming out at the end of the day? Why do I want to know that? Why does that matter to you? Finding common ground. Beautiful. Okay. So the answers to the questions help us find common ground, help us better understand the person and their story. Now let's zoom out from ourselves a little bit. Why would the answers to these questions, as we've posed them right now, why would they matter to your community? Now it's you and everybody in your neighborhood or everybody in your town. Why do the answers to such questions as how long was your shift today? What are you having for lunch or dinner? What's the experience of work? Like, what was the experience like working in coal? Why did those answers matter to your community? They tell our story of what life is like. I love that. Every story is important. It's a huge industry in Eastern Kentucky. They help our community relate to the photograph. Gives perspective, familiar to the community or not familiar, right? To facilitate connection. Beautiful. Okay, so then for me looking at this photograph and for me getting the answers to these questions, it's quite different because I'm a good deal far away from you all, and I've had a different upbringing probably than these folks have, but to some degree there's some overlap. We just got to find it, and so those answers would help me find it. To understand a different part of Appalachia, noting that it was a hard life and people could relate to the challenges and feel less alone. I love this. Okay, so last question, zoom all the way out. Imagine that you were looking at that very famous blue marble photograph of the Earth taken from the space shuttle. You see it floating in the big black void of space. Why do the answers to these questions matter to the world? Why does it matter to the world to know what it is like to come out into the light at the end of the day? Why does it matter to know for the world, were you scared? That's such an intensely personal question, but why does it matter to the world? To remember what early miners went through to make the industry safer. Beautiful. Anything more? Human condition is universal, secures a place in the timeline. The world needs to know how to cope with isolation too. Beautiful. Questioning the level of poverty for such a dangerous job. Anything more?
I can't top this, but I'm just overwhelmed with how, when I think about questions to ask in interviewing in history, you think of these big ideas. And I just love the questions that we wrote because
aren't they beautiful?
Yes, and the letting someone be valued.
Yes.
In asking the questions.
Yes.
And that someone wanted to hear it and respected it and just wanted to let them tell just those little, like how starting with just little short snippets of just about the lunchbox or tell me something you remember, and just listening and just taking the time to listen and hear the story being told.
Yes, thank you. That's wonderful. I'm noting in the chat box also the idea of something that is so easy to take for granted, like electricity. Where does it come from? Answers to these questions would give us like a very different perspective on flipping on the light switch. The different ways that people sacrifice, that's happening all over the world all the time. And that's a human universal. The struggle to maintain a life in the mine country, to understand how the world operates in different areas. Like when we use an image to zoom way out, we all get an opportunity to kind of, I think, find some threads that connect us across difference and across time. Because these guys by now, this is like 76, I think that this was taken. So this is 50 years ago. Maybe these men aren't even living anymore. I hope that they are, but if they aren't, we still have a way to connect them. We connect to to the past through their image. And this is a really interesting way to think of that quilt, the knitting thread that ties past, present, and future together. It ties geographic area together. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that really, I would argue, art can do in a really emotionally evocative way. But there's something that's really beautiful also about the opportunity to hear from the people in the artwork. So the pairing of the history, them telling their own stories, and their image is really powerful, I would argue. So then, I have no idea where the first reflection slide is, but I'm just going to invite you to think way back to the very beginning, the very, very beginning. And you were like, okay, I'm an art teacher going to a session about oral histories. Did you have some ideas about what an oral history might be? That might be, I used to think an oral history would be and now I think ... Or alternatively, if you had some other first impression of the whole thing, I used to think ... Now I think ... Will you put an idea in the chat, please? For those of you watching the recording, this is when I start to panic because I'm like, oh no, nobody's answering my question. And then I remember that when you ask a complex question, you've got to give enough time to let people answer it. So that's when I have to practice not talking, which I'm doing a very bad job of right now, but I'm justifying it by saying that it's for the recording. So there you go. Oh, summer. Back to the very beginning. At the very top of our time together, we were talking about things that were valuable from PDs that you've attended in the past. And something that came up was like immediately practical ideas are very valuable. So the idea of when somebody's speaking, having them draw is a way to stay engaged. Beautiful. I'm so glad there's a takeaway there. Robin saying, I used to think finished visual art story was not complicated. Now I think it is a complex unfolding of a life, and the details, the senses, and memories knit together. Beautiful. Marcia is saying, I have learned that everyone has an oral history, not just great storytellers. Truth. I love that. So my friends, this is something that I would love to continue talking about with you. If you're interested in having us come and play in your neighborhood and talk about oral histories and community photography, I'm going to give you a little more information on that. Final plug. We're going to be doing this also next year. So if we don't get to collaborate this year, I'd love to collaborate next year. I'll also put in a plug that at the Smithsonian American Art Museum and the National Portrait Gallery do have summer institutes for teachers where you can come to DC and learn with teachers from all across the US. So just putting in a plug. So if you would like to collaboratively celebrate the centennial, the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 2026. Would love to talk more with you about creating portraits of community. Just shoot me an email at dinesi@si.edu. And I'm delighted to tell you that thanks to Together We Thrive, which is an internal grant maker, any teachers who are participating in this collaboration, either during years 1 or 2, get $1,500 in gratitude for your expertise. And we also, if you don't have photography equipment at your school, we do have some limited funds to send you photography equipment to borrow for the term of the project. So just putting that all out there. I think that's it. I think that's all I've got for you. I am happy to stay on for a bit just because we're ending 4 minutes early. If any of you have questions that I can answer or have an idea that you'd like to brainstorm about something you're doing in your art classroom and you want a suggested artwork from our collection, I'm delighted to do that. I'm going to stop the recording and stop the share. And